So science is really about these kind of liberating ideas. I think that knowledge isn't the property of anybody, of any specific group. This is the idea of universalism. The validity, the truth of a scientific theory does not depend in any sense on who it was that proposed it. It just depends on, does it accord with empirical truth better than any other theory?
Welcome to The Shape of Dialogue.
Thank you very much, Michael. Very pleased to be on your show.
It's great to have you along here. So today I'm talking to Doug Elliffe. So who is Doug Elliffe? Give us a quick rundown of who you are.
Oh, goodness. So I'm a psychology professor at the University of Auckland. I've been at Auckland since 1979, kind of man and boy. Came up here to study optometry in 1979. Found it wasn't interesting, had to do some compulsory psychology as part of that, drifted across to that. And I've, sort of risen through the ranks there, became head of the Department of Psychology in 2010 and did that for about 5 years, and then became Deputy Dean of Science, and have, stepped down from that position over the listener letter, and now I'm just back to being a normal professor in psychology.
So yes, you're one of what I call the heretical seven.
Yeah.
So you...
Sadly, only 5 of us now.
Yes, yes. So you signed a letter which was published in the national magazine, The Listener.
Yep.
And what was the letter saying, and what was the reaction?
The letter was saying that a message that was coming from the Ministry of Education, or parts of the Ministry of Education, that science was an instrument of the coloniser and therefore was not for Māori. Well, at least that's how I interpreted it as saying that. And I objected to that, being a kind of universal humanist, and thinking that science is a very powerful way of understanding the world. I think we'll try and talk more about that later. And I couldn't see any reason why it would be beneficial to say to a particular group that this is not for you.
Right. Where do you think that concept came from? I mean, what sort of people were pushing it, and why do you think they were pushing it?
There's a postmodern critical social justice perspective that knowledge is never pure. Knowledge is always about a way of maintaining power. I think that may be true in various ways, and that's something that we'll perhaps come to later, although I think that the targets of that are not the ones that the postmodernists usually apply that accusation to. And so I think that there's a tendency to think, here's a group that's been oppressed, so therefore we can point to things that scientists have done because scientists are people over the years, so I think that there are those sort of political reasons for it. I also think that there's a kind of hankering for spiritual explanations, that people still come to that, and science is really quite explicit about explanations being naturalistic rather than supernatural. And so I think that there is a kind of a bias against science, which is why that needs defending. And we called our letter In Defence of Science for just that reason.
And the reaction to it?
Reaction was the way I often put that: public condemnation and private support. So I lost count of the number of colleagues, the number of emails I got saying, thank you, we think you're really brave. I don't think this is really brave. Keith Miller, the great Australian cricketer who was a fighter pilot in World War II, talked about pressure, and say, that's not pressure playing test cricket. Pressure is having a Messerschmitt up your ass. And so I don't think what we did was actually a particularly brave thing to do, but I think it was a sort of a necessary thing to do. Nevertheless, several of us faced, fairly severe consequences. There were calls on me to resign as acting dean of science, which is what I was at that time. So I do need to emphasise those didn't come from university leadership. You have to always be fair, fair to these people to make that point that the pressure did not come from them.
Where was it coming from? From
colleagues.
From colleagues.
Colleagues, yeah. And
saying that you had to resign.
Yes.
Because why?
Oh, because if I was saying these things, I must be racist.
Right.
There you go.
So what was their line of reasoning?
Oh, it's hard to say. So there are different ways, of course, to define racism. The one that I tend to like is, the sort of Martin Luther King position that when you are judging people by their identity rather than by their character, then you are doing a racist thing. People think now that racism is the combination of discrimination on the basis of race plus power. So that would mean that you can't be racist if you're in the more oppressed group. That's a line of reasoning. I don't agree with that, but that's the position. So I think that for some people there was a kind of general liberal, which I share, tendency to think that I must show solidarity with the oppressed. So there was that. I think that there were, some genuine postmodern radicals who objected to it, and there are some other reasons that I'd quite like to come to later because they wouldn't make sense if I talk about them now without us talking a little bit about what science might be. So I think that's where some of that reaction came from. Rather little of it came from scientists. Interestingly, so having gone through,
you said colleagues. You're in the science department, that scientists can't.
There were certainly some.
You're saying administrative staff.
No. I'm saying that, for example, most of the people who signed the open letter drafted by Susie Wiles and Sean Handy, most of those were not in science faculties around the country.
Right. Yeah.
But nevertheless, there were some. Pressure didn't come from administration. That's fair to say.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, that's one thing to be positive. So I've always been interested in why you resigned. What?
Why I resigned? Yeah. Well, again.
Why does pressure, someone saying things that are axiomatically wrong, cause you to actually resign?
So without going into naming people, I talked about this in another podcast. One particular person threatened the provocation of a governance crisis within the faculty. That this person proposed to resign if I didn't, to go public about why that person felt compelled to do that. I talked about that with the Vice Chancellor and the head of HR and the permanent Dean of Science, because I was acting Dean of Science while he was seconded to other duties, and came to the conclusion that things would blow over more quickly if I just got out of the way and say, okay, so I felt that I was given an ultimatum where one or other person had to do what we thought would be better for the university, and I, with this tendency to prefer peace rather than conflict, thought that it might be best if I got out of the way. Mm-hmm. That's the nature of the pressure.
Right. Now, I heard you talk on another podcast, the Free Kiwis podcast, with the wonderful James and Michael, that you had spent your life as a career scientist and then thought the later part of your career would be administrative, in the sense you'd be helping the younger people coming up.
Yeah.
Now, when I heard that, it seemed an enormous waste that that you're now no longer doing that.
Well,
or in that role.
Yeah, it sounds, I guess, smug, but I felt I had something to contribute in that sort of space. So when I was appointed as head of psychology, which is not something I sought out by any means, but I was asked to do that by the then dean, and what he said to me was that you'll enjoy this and do well at it if you can take pleasure in other people's success. And so I thought, am I like that? And I thought, I probably am. So that one of the things I think I do best is teaching rather than research. I think I've always been a kind of a teaching-focused academic. I still taught stage 1 lectures even while I was being Dean of Science, for example. And so being able to influence other people was something that I liked. And again, I've always been keen on this idea of the fast fail, and that what we should do is to let 1,000 flowers bloom and just see which one survives. So that I was happy for people to try to facilitate other academics doing the sort of things that they wanted to do, and we'd see which would come out. Because I'm a perfectly respectable scientist, but I wouldn't say that I'm sort of well known in my field. But it's a smallish field, and I'm not Einstein, I'm not Steve Pinker. So I thought I could make a bigger contribution to to my university and to the future of science by doing that.
Well, it seems a shame that didn't happen.
I regret it.
Yeah.
I regret it, and maybe I should have been more stroppy and resisted.
But it is hard, and in the moment, those sort of decisions are quite hard.
It's hard in the moment where you think the consequences could be really severe, and you can always back away from a fight, and it may be easier to do that. But also, I thought that some of the things we were reacting to in the listener letter were likely to be sort of passing fashions, and that people would see sense in the end.
Where are you now on that?
Well,
so that's the listener letter in context. It's 4 years ago. Yeah,
I've gone through an arc of now perhaps being slightly more hopeful. So I think that people are starting to realise the value of academic freedom, the importance of institutional neutrality in securing academic freedom. That there's a bit of a move worldwide to resist this idea that it hurts people to hear ideas that they don't like. So John Hake's work on this sort of thing.
I've heard the term hurty words.
Yeah, and so always there was a grain of truth in the idea that people can be hurt by hearing things. That is of course partly true, but I think that universities are supposed to be truth-seeking institutions. Our job is the discovery, improvement and dissemination of knowledge. That's what we're about. And that will mean that there are some ideas that fail and some ideas that succeed. And really just to be so totally relativist that everything is okay, that we're perfectly happy with any idea.
And there's no actual truth.
Yeah,
out there.
well, I think that's right. So that's almost a caricature of the postmodern position that there's no actual truth. I shouldn't think that there are very many, even full-blown postmodernists who don't believe, for example, that the Earth goes around the sun rather than the other way around.
Well, that's what they actually try and have it both ways. They said there's no truth.
Mm-hmm.
But then certain groups use truth to oppress other people. So they sort of
claims.
They can't have it both ways. You can't have no truth and then truth.
No, I don't think so. So it is, I guess, a kind of a logical fallacy to say, the only absolute truth is that there is no absolute truth or something like that. But I mean,
Well, let's talk about universal knowledge. And how science fits into that, and then maybe some other forms of explanatory. What was your term? Explanatory
systems.
Explanatory systems. Yeah. So do you want to start riffing on that?
Sure. Yeah. I do actually, because this is really what I wanted to talk about today, and I've got to sort of preface this by saying, while these are ideas that I came up with myself, I'm by no means the first person to do so. So it would be worth if you had the opportunity to interview Brian Boyd, say, who's done a lot of work in these sort of areas. So I think that humans and indeed all organisms are kind of curious, to understand the nature of their world. And and that they do that first for purely practical reasons. Like there are, we need to know what food should we eat, what other animals should we avoid, what other animals should we prey on, all that sort of stuff, and how to make fire, things like that. So Elizabeth Rata, I think she would want the term socio-cultural knowledge to extend further than that. But those are things that are sort of socio-cultural knowledge, ways of living in the world that we acquire.
Practical.
Yeah, they're often practical, although they can be practical in the sense that they lead to, say, better social interactions and things.
Right.
But most of these things you can argue you can acquire by direct experience or by watching somebody else do them, and this
and trial and error.
Trial and error, yeah, and trial and error is of course part of science. You try things and see whether they work or not. That's called an experiment. So I think that there's that, but I think that quite quickly humans have come to want to know why things work, rather than only know that they work. So they want an explanation for these ideas.
Say that again.
Humans want to know why things work, not just that they work.
Right.
So there's a claim for what's sometimes called indigenous knowledge. So that's a term that we might come back to. So we don't need to know why things work. We only need to know that they work. And I'd say, well, I don't think humans are like that. I think humans are fundamentally more sort of curious than that. And these things can be difficult to do. So one of the things that we try to get over to first year science students is the notion that correlation does not imply causation. So just because two things go together, we can't conclude from that one of them caused the other one to happen, right? And this seems in a logical sense, this is kind of self-evident, and I used to think, why do people need to be persuaded of that? It was always quite a hard idea to get across. And what I've come to think in recent years is that actually, in the practical knowledge sense, correlation quite often does imply causation. So that it's not a bad rule of thumb to take. If I'm going to learn things about the world, then often the only evidence I'm going to have is going to be correlations that, these two things tend to go together. And quite often it will be true that there is some sort of...
Well, if I stub my toe, it's going to hurt.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
I mean, it just makes me think that in many respects, most things in our daily life, the correlation and causation are connected, aren't they? Yeah, well,
that's very often so. But think of a counter example that I use with first year psychology students. Suppose we observe that violent behaviour by children is correlated with watching violent films. Okay, and people might say, well, it's the films that are making the kids violent, and therefore we should ban the films. A causes B. But it's equally possible that kids who are inherently violent are choosing to watch the violent films, and B causes A, or it could be that they're both caused by some third variable that we don't know about. So sometimes what we intuitively conclude from the correlations will be correct, and sometimes it will be incorrect. And that's why we need science, because it makes an explicit point about distinguishing between...
And often these are counterintuitive.
Yeah, well,
we
I think they can.
We sort of naturally search for the simple explanations.
Yeah. Well, I don't know that we do, and this is something that I want to come back to. So I think that for everyday life, making the assumption that correlation implies causation is probably a good thing to do, because that makes it easier for us to learn if we're sort of recognising patterns about things happen. Sometimes what we learn will be not true when we do that, and so but often it will be the case, and so therefore that's not bad. So I think we've become evolved to recognise correlations, and I think animals do this too, so. An experiment that I published relatively recently was one where we asked pigeons to make judgments about causality, effectively.
Because you work with pigeons.
I work with pigeons mainly, yeah. Okay, so pigeon pecks a key, a little lighted disc, and every so often we reinforce that by giving it food, right? But at the same time, we're giving it food at the same rate, but independent of its behaviour. So these are free foods that are just being given that weren't caused by the response of key pecking. And then after each of these, we ask the pigeon, well, did you do that, or did that happen randomly? And we do that by providing two other keys. Peck left if you think you did it, peck right if you think it was random. They learn to do this. They learn to make that distinction rather well. But they're biased in favour of saying, I did it. Yeah? So that they're more likely to report that they caused the behaviour.
It's almost, am I correct? It's almost like the origins of spirituality of gods.
Well, I think
because I had this sort of magical power to make this food come out.
I want to come to that.
Is that an extrapolation that has any logic to it?
Yeah. Well, I do want to get to that in the end. Yeah. So I think that we can show that quite a simple animal, if you like, has a sort of a sense of agency. Yeah,
it thinks it's doing something when it's not.
It thinks that it's doing something that it's not, and of course this is a standard behavioural explanation of superstition. So if a behaviour is followed by a favourable set of circumstances, we call a reinforcer, it's likely to be repeated, and the reasoning, if you like, must be that that the organism thinks that the behaviour caused the favourable event, therefore to be repeated.
It made me think of Sir Peter Blake in the America's Cup,
the Red Sox.
Yeah. Yeah. And what's fascinating is someone like Peter Blake would be highly rational. You don't win the America's Cup by being irrational. Yeah. But then incredibly irrational superstition about red socks, because wearing red socks makes no difference whether you're going to win or lose.
There's a kind of risk aversion about doing the experiment, isn't there? Sort of, what if I decided, because I'm rational, I'm not going to wear my red socks that day, and I didn't do it?
Yeah.
I used to open the batting, and I was an extraordinarily superstitious cricketer. For reasons like that, and I think most cricketers are.
I think we all are.
Yeah. Yes. But I think that the reason for that is that we've evolved a tendency to attribute events in the world to our behaviour. And I think that it's a good thing that we do that, because if we went through life thinking that everything's random, then it would be very difficult for us to learn.
Well, if you think of pre-scientific communities, the crops failed. It's because there were witches here, or whatever the reason is. They would make up reasons why the crop failed, and they were reasons not associated with actually the cause.
So that's right, but I want to come to why I think that sort of explanation developed, because most explanations for how things happen in the world appeal to the supernatural in one way or another. Historically, that's what we've usually done. So if we accept that organisms have evolved a sense of agency, which I think that sort of have evidence that would be so, and things happen and you can't see what the agent was, then it's a very natural thing to do to suppose that there's an agent you couldn't see. And again, that might be quite a rational thing to do, I'm trying to remember the example Brian Boyd gave. If you think that there might be a tiger in that patch of undergrowth, then you're best to avoid it. Even though you can't see it. Yeah. So avoiding danger. I mean, you don't know whether it's there or not, but there might be one there. So why not go around it? Why not?
And that could be extrapolated to gods.
Yeah.
So if I don't sacrifice a cow, the gods won't look favourably on me.
So I think we invent gods because we're used to the idea of agency. Yeah? And so therefore, if things happen, we make the assumption that we cause things to happen, and it's a very small step from that to say that if things happen, something is causing them.
So ironically, it's incredibly logical.
Yeah.
So, and if I always try and imagine what it would be like to be have a pre-scientific mind.
Yeah.
And, we know what the moon is. We know what the stars are. Little kids know what they are, right? We know what the sun is.
Yeah.
But it was only about 150 years ago we didn't know what the sun was.
No, absolutely.
And we have this intuition to find explanations for the world. So in many respects, from what you're saying, I caused this to happen. So another agent would be out there, but it's a much bigger agent causing the thunder.
Yeah.
How else would you explain thunder?
How else would you explain it? Because we're making this assumption that events are caused by an agent.
Yes.
And just to give you an example of that happening with pigeons again. Pigeons pecking a key. There's another pigeon in the cage beside it. Okay, so one pigeon's pecking a key, and then we give the first pigeon an electric shock. And a very common phenomenon that you see.
The pigeon pecking the key?
The pigeon pecking the key gets an electric shock. The other pigeon is just beside it doing nothing. What happens often is you get this phenomenon called shock-induced aggression, where the pigeon that's just received the shock goes and attacks the other one.
Yeah.
It's as if it's saying, you did that,
right,
you bastard, and so I'm going to attack you.
He's applying causation.
Yeah. So assuming,
just by proximity.
Assuming there's an agent,
Right.
Assuming that there's something that did it. And one of the messages of science, I think, is that things can happen without agency. So that there are sort of emergent phenomena. And an example I like is when we see a flock of birds or a shoal of fish, cruising around together in this ball, and it looks magical and it looks guided, and as if there's some kind of higher mind controlling the behaviour of the whole flock or the shoal or whatever that might be. But it's not true. So this comes from very simple rules about proximity.
It's an algorithm, essentially.
Yeah. So one of the magic things about science, I think, is that it shows how often amazingly complicated things can have incredibly simple origins. But again, that's counterintuitive. So we tend to look for explanations that match the phenomenon that we're seeing in terms of complexity.
Because if we made birds go into that shape, or objects in the sky go into that shape, we would have to do it as being like an artist.
Yes.
It's like a painter can create a shape.
Right.
And he's causing that shape.
So we think the shape's there, something must be causing it.
Yeah.
So and at the same time, when we're thinking about supernatural agencies causing things, we'd say, well, they're very powerful, so we need to placate them. And so there are various things that we might do to, for example, make the sun keep coming up. And of course, they will be reinforced.
Well, if you were giving me, $1,000 a week, I would want to make sure that you were well fed, you were looked after, we would respect you, we would honour you. And now you're a god, and you're making the harvest come in.
Yeah, but think of it. But think more. Often it will be about trying to prevent something bad happening.
Yes.
Yeah. So it might well be that nothing bad would have happened anyway, but this behaviour of placating the god in whatever way it might be will itself automatically be reinforced because the bad thing you were worried about didn't happen. So that's an explanation for why superstitions tend to be about avoidance. We don't tend to, we maintain for sort of folklore reasons the idea that if we follow the rainbow, there'll be a pot of gold at the end of it. But none of us believe that that's actually true. I remember searching for it as a kid.
Are you really telling me it's not true?
I'm really telling you it's not true, Michael.
Okay. I'm going to have to rethink everything.
But superstitions like that are relatively rare. Most of our superstitions are about avoiding an adverse consequence rather than generating, an actively good consequence. And so they will be reinforced because nothing bad did happen. So so don't walk under ladders and nothing, a paint bucket didn't fall on our head.
Right.
Yeah.
So you've articulated really beautifully this, in a sense, a pre-scientific mind, and how a pre-scientific mind, in a sense, is attempting to be very logical, and within that pre-scientific world, it makes complete sense to try and attribute causations to higher powers and all that sort of thing. So then, roughly in the Enlightenment, so in the 1600s and 1700s, something called science came along.
Yeah. Well, it's sort of had its origins then, didn't it? Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. So
Well, it actually goes right back to the ancient Greeks.
Sure.
But there was a
Yeah.
pivotal point in the Enlightenment
Mm.
where philosophers actually came to discover, in a sense, ways of doing science, and scientists actually did science, and it achieved these very novel outcomes. So, do you want to talk about what science is, and then how it is distinct from other explanatory systems, or a pre-scientific explanatory system?
So to me, what I just want to go back to what you were saying about these other kinds of explanations being logical ones to hold. I think that's true, but the way I would put it is that they are likely ones to have evolved.
Yes,
because there are things about them that we share with other animals.
Can I just clarify something? In a sense, maybe reasonable is a better word. Because they're actually quite illogical.
Yeah. So,
but if you applied pure logic to them, it's reasonable to assume that it's not a bad thing to do.
So logic is a tool. You can't disprove those on the basis of logic. You simply can't say it is not logically true that there is a God or a supernatural entity of some kind causing these things. You can't get evidence about that. So to me, and I was raised religiously, I guess, to me, the kind of powerful idea is to say, well, let's have a go at explaining things without appeal to supernatural entities of any kind, and see how well that works. And my answer to that would be, well, it's worked startlingly well. So one of the books I always like to recommend people read is Richard Dawkins' small book called, I think, Climbing Mount Improbable, about how the eye could have evolved, because the eye is often taken as here's incontrovertible evidence that there must be a designer, because how else could there are so many things about the eye that seem unlikely. And so Dawkins, traced through a series of steps that how that could have happened. And I love this idea that emergent properties, things that didn't have to be designed into a system, nevertheless, appear from the system. So I don't think that we can ever make the case that science is right and supernatural explanations are wrong, and that's logically provable. Some people think you can prove that. But what I think we can do is to offer to people, look, here's this other kind of explanation, which is different from all of the ones that there have been in our history. And
it's different. In what way is it different? Why is that important? That it's different. I mean, there's lots of different ways of coming to a problem.
It's important because it doesn't appeal to the supernatural. So that's something that we've always done historically through sort of human civilization of various kinds. The explanations for phenomena that we've had have been supernatural. And here is science saying, here's a way I can explain that without you having to do that. And to me, that's a really kind of liberating thing to think.
Why is it liberating?
Well, it's liberating because it suggests that we're masters of our own destiny. That there is no no higher power that can either reward us with heaven or punish us with hell. That sort of thing. That we masters of our own destiny. And I think that we can come up with explanations that are much more logically satisfying, that we can find evidence directly for, and therefore, I think that we can feel happier about our understanding of the world in those terms, and we can make predictions, and they are predictions that we can test.
Yes, and they're more closely aligned to truth, in the sense that, I know truth is a difficult word, and that's why I say closely aligned in the sense that no scientific fact or piece of information or piece of knowledge is actually saying it is the ultimate dogma. This is actually the truth. It's saying it's provisionally true until we find a better explanation.
Yeah.
But what I'm saying is a pre-scientific mindset is so far away from the truth when we're saying the thunder is created by Zeus throwing, things, whatever. I can't remember what the explanation is.
Well, maybe it is, but
Yeah.
maybe it is. But maybe it's also due to Quetzalcoatl,
Yeah.
Maybe it's also due to Ruamoko or wherever it might be. And so, okay, that I don't think that it takes us very much further forward in understanding what it is that might be going on.
Well, I think. Well, you tell me. If I said that one is untrue and one explanation is untrue.
Yeah.
So Zeus creating the thunder or whatever he did, and then how the thunder is actually created. The scientific explanation, is one true and one untrue?
I think that the scientific explanation is much more true because I don't think that Zeus exists.
Yeah, it's a probabilistic thing. It's more likely to be true.
Yep.
Like by orders of magnitude.
Yeah.
So in a sense, we don't need to take the Zeus explanation seriously.
Well, no, I don't. I don't feel that I need to take it seriously.
Why wouldn't you extrapolate that to we? And when I say we, as a society.
So I think that.
I mean, you don't take Zeus seriously on a daily basis.
No, I don't. I mean, Chris Brookmyre, who's a very funny Scottish crime novelist, wrote, writing as an atheist and talking to somebody who was a fundamentalist Christian and saying, look, there's only one more God that I don't believe in than that you don't believe in. So I think that we can say that there's been this proliferation of different supernatural entities proposed by different cultures. Are they all names for the same thing? Well, I suppose that's a logical possibility. The accounts often differ in sort of quite profound ways. So I think that I think that humanity would be better if they dropped these ideas. But I'm also kind of a Democrat. So one of the things I was hoping we might talk about is the way that policy might be shaped by either appeal to scientific evidence or appeal to spiritual beliefs, and I don't think it's the case that one should trump the other automatically. I know which one I would want to argue vigorously for, that the scientific evidence should matter, but ultimately when you've got different people thinking different things, then that can be fine so long as they don't affect policy. But when they do come to affect policy, then the decision-making process we have for that, the best one we've come up with yet, is in fact democratic. So that's how we have to decide, So I don't think that spiritual explanations should be entitled to hold a veto power, but also I don't think that science should be entitled to hold a veto power either. We have to put these ideas forward to the people, as it were, or to their representatives, because that's the particular system that we have for how we do democracy. And say, here are the arguments, we're going to let you choose. So if I believed in, suppose I was a Satanist, and
you mean you're not?
I don't believe that Satan exists.
Okay.
So suppose I was to claim that some societal practice is fundamentally offensive to me because of my beliefs. I don't think anybody would take me seriously. So why would we do so about any other set of beliefs? And to say that those should be trump cards.
The elephant in the room is essentially Mātauranga Māori. Is what we
but
what
it's
we've
only
been.
One. It's only one.
Yes. Yeah. No, but my point is that there's a multitude of them. Astrology, all sorts of things. But there seems to be a very genuine attempt to have respect for, inverted commas, Māori knowledge, which is the term is Mātauranga Māori.
Yeah.
What is that a good thing? Is that a bad thing? Is that a combination of the two?
I think that it is important to respect people. And so therefore I should try not to be rude about what people believe. Respect doesn't, I think, mean conferring a trump card. But let's go back, just a little bit to Maori. And I'm no expert in this, but I would say that what that does is to combine both sociocultural knowledge, practical knowledge, you might say, to do that, but also explanations of why things happen. So and that's why I like to talk about different explanatory systems. So
a classic example in Māori mythology is that Māori,
yeah, Māori, I think.
Pulled up the North Island.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
You're talking
Maui.
about
Maui. Sorry.
Maui.
Yeah. Couldn't quite remember that.
Yeah.
Maui pulled up the North Island. He was in a canoe with his brothers, and he had a jawbone as a hook on a string, and he pulled up the North Island. Now, artistically, you can say that is an incredibly inventive, creative, and in one sense quite beautiful concept. Did it happen?
Shouldn't think so.
Right. So there's a low probability. There's a very low probability of it happening, as opposed to continental drift and geological forces.
Well, remember how long it took continental drift and tectonic plates to be. It was originally thought of as an utterly mad theory.
People laughed at
it was
concept.
Wegener or somebody like that.
That rings true.
And of course, the idea was sort of utterly rejected. This must be mad. But more and more evidence accumulates for why this might be so. So science makes the assumption that there is an objective reality to be tested against. So I don't think, and it favours explanations that invite testing, rather than so that's what we do.
Well, that can be falsified.
Yeah. So this is a sort of a third counterintuitive thing about science. So we would normally think, wouldn't we, that if we've got a theory about how things are working, then what we look for is kind of confirmation of that theory, and we'll just sort of, so long as it keeps working, we'll keep repeating it. The behaviour is being reinforced and is therefore likely to be repeated. And science says, no, don't do that. Try to test it to destruction. Think of what would evidence be that would prove that this theory is not true? And it's only if it survives tests like that we would tend to, we would provisionally accept it.
Yes. Keyword provisionally.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, because so most of what science has thought over the years has been wrong. There've been a lot of different conceptions of what goes on inside an atom. Say, we may not have it right yet.
Well, I when I interviewed Steven Pinker, I said to him, I put this to him, and you tell me what you think. Science is a process of getting most things wrong and some things right.
Yeah, I think that's true. We don't necessarily know which ones we've got right yet, but it is a process. So I think that the general public tends to think of science as a body of knowledge, and I think that's
almost a dogma.
Yeah. So science says that.
So you're a priest of science, and I've said ABC, and therefore it's true.
Yeah. So I really object to that characterisation. That's not to say that there aren't people who behave that way who call themselves scientists. That's certainly true. Scientists are no more moral than any other group of people.
Well, they can be as arrogant as the next person.
Absolutely. But that's also to say the next person can be quite arrogant too.
Well, they're scientists are human beings.
Yeah. So science is really about these kind of liberating ideas. I think that knowledge isn't the property of anybody, of any specific group. This is the idea of universalism, that the validity, the truth of a scientific theory does not depend in any sense on who it was that proposed it. Okay, it just depends on, does it accord with empirical truth better than any other theory? So,
well, what I was going to say before is that you're talking about you have a theory and you're trying to test it.
Yes.
You're putting it through a crucible.
Yep.
to try and debunk it as much as well as you can. To the best of your efforts.
Yeah. Well,
because unless you do that, you could be making the same mistake as we did when we thought there was Zeus on top of Mount Olympus.
Yeah. So a lot of my research employs a kind of logic called the experimentum crucis. The crucial experiment, where we've got two possible explanations of a phenomenon. Let's try and set things up so that those two explanations will make different predictions. Which one happens? Okay, and so therefore, we're choosing between a better explanation and a worse explanation all the time. So this is again
right
why I want to use the characterization explanatory systems rather than knowledge systems. So if knowledge is justified true belief, which is a common way to define what knowledge might be, then if you've got things that are if you have knowledges that are fundamentally untestable, that just don't subject themselves to the possibility of being tested.
Well, is that actually
knowledge? Well,
is it knowledge or is it just a claim?
Yeah, well, it is.
I would call it a claim.
It is a claim.
I mean, there's an infinite amount of claims.
Yeah. But it is a claim about an explanation of the world, which is why I don't like the term belief systems so much. But first, because it can sound pejorative, but second, because then we would say, well, science is just another belief system, and indeed people do that. And so
people have said that.
Yeah, people say that sort of thing.
As they're using their iPhones.
Yes. So let's. Technology depends on science, but let's not confuse science with technology. It's a great pity that we have, Ministry of Science and Technology, because they are different. Mm-hmm. So the science bit of it is about the explanation, about the discovery. Yeah. So that's why these are different ways of trying to explain the world. Most of the ways that people have chosen have been supernatural. Here is one that isn't. So let's let these things compete with each other.
Going back to policy, should Mātauranga Māori be a guiding light for policy in New Zealand?
Well, I don't think so. I think it's something that should be listened to.
Why shouldn't it be? You've sort of almost having it both ways there. You said it shouldn't be, but we should listen to it. Why shouldn't it be? We should cover that first.
Because So any claim that I think requires the claim that a specific group has specific knowledge which is only theirs is fundamentally unscientific. That violates the principles.
But what's wrong with it being unscientific? You need to, in a sense, explain more.
Nothing's wrong with it. Nothing's wrong with it being unscientific, and so when we are deciding between competing explanations of things, if we are not going to say, well, let's do it scientifically by what we can verify empirically, and that's one way to do it, but we will not likely change people's spiritual accounts of things. We won't make them think that that's not true. And that's why I think that the mechanism that we have for deciding between those is democracy. So when I say that we should listen, I say...
What happens when most people want a non-scientific body of knowledge to guide policy?
Well, I think that
because that is totally democratic. I'm not equating it with the same thing, but people vote for terrible regimes around the world.
I think we have to go with it. I think that people often say that democracy is the worst system apart from all the other ones.
Yeah, Churchill said that.
It was Churchill, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I say, okay, I think that if something is the will of the people, even though I disagree with it, I think we have to say that is the system that we have bought into.
But then why? Just getting back, let's forget about the rest of the population. Just you personally, in your way of thinking, why wouldn't you, if you were Prime Minister of New Zealand, why wouldn't you predicate mātauranga Māori over science to develop policy?
I think I would do that.
Scientific, maybe I should say a scientific way of thinking.
Scientific way of thinking would be the way to do it. So I don't think that people should do that because I don't think it would be a good idea. But
another way of putting it, we seek to achieve utility in our lives. Like we want to make our own lives better generally, and we want to make the rest of society better, the people around us immediately, and then the broader society. So the real question is, which way of thinking is going to create the most positive outcome?
Well, I know my answer to that, which is that it would be scientific thinking. But I am one person, so I think objections to genetic engineering are irrational. Right? Nevertheless, a majority of the population currently thinks that we don't want any of that. We don't want to have rabbit's ears growing out of tomatoes or whatever it was, and that'll happen if we let you do this.
Yeah.
So
the end of the world.
Yeah. So, but I think the nature of the political system is that I'm entitled to try to persuade them otherwise, but I'm not entitled to dictate. So science has no power to dictate, but neither do spiritual beliefs. No?
Yes. So it's good for the goose, it's good for the gander.
Yeah. So, gay marriage, say. I mean, people fundamentally objected to that on spiritual religious grounds. They thought it was wrong and evil. And
an abomination.
And we didn't allow that to be a trump card. What we decided is we're going to decide this democratically. Different people are going to think different things.
Let's move on to the state of the universities and in general, and maybe Auckland University in particular as an example. Are you, if you're a betting man, would you bet on the on universities or against them?
Well, it depends what we decide to do. So I think that we are in danger of forgetting what our mission is. What John Haidt, I think, calls the telos, the purpose of universities. That is, what did society grant us this incredible privilege for? So we have jobs that are pretty good. They're well paid. They offer an amazing amount of sort of personal autonomy about what we're allowed to research on, what we're allowed to teach. We can do all sorts of things. So what are we doing to earn that favour? And I think that we've had this kind of social contract with the populace, the government, which is about there being something fundamentally worthwhile about the discovery, improvement and dissemination of knowledge. So, we do some sort of practical training, like, where are the doctors going to come from? Where are the lawyers going to come from? Though we think that that's less of an unmixed gain. So we do that. But we don't only do that. We do stuff that is simply about finding out more about the world and telling it to people. And we're allowed to do that because society thinks that's a good thing. Now, there's a possibility that if we forget what that mission is, and I think we are beginning to forget what that mission is, which is that we're trying to build a better world according to particular, concepts of critical social justice and so forth. I think that there are relatively few people who think this, but I think that they're noisy and they're quite effective. And I think that we run the risk that society decides we're not interested in you doing that anymore, and therefore we're not prepared to fund it.
So you're essentially saying that if the universities keep on going off the rails, sort of philosophically, the populace,
as exemplified by the politicians, because that is,
will finish their
I think
their funding.
Well, you can see this happening.
They'll essentially lose their patience.
Yeah. So I want to make the point that lots of good routine everyday stuff still continues to go on within universities, and that gets less attention does a lot of the kind of somewhat crazy stuff that goes on within universities. And I think that one of the good things that continues to go on is building a more sort of scientifically literate population. And I think that that's really important, that these ideas that science has, that correlation does not imply causation, that things can happen without agency, that the level of explanation of something doesn't necessarily coincide with the level of apparent complexity that we can observe. These are all counterintuitive things, and they need to be taught. And I gave some reasons earlier why I think we've evolved in a way that makes those counterintuitive. So that we need to get those ideas across to people all the time, and we're doing this.
Yes, and it's not a way of thinking that you can essentially come up with your own ex nihilo. It has to be passed down from generation to generation, because it's taken a few 100,000 years to even get here.
It has to be taught, and
this is what Elizabeth Rata talks about.
That was where I was going to come to.
Knowledge from the mind, in a sense, rather than experience.
Yeah. So when we're talking about academic knowledge, I would say that methods and ways of thinking are part of that academic knowledge too, and particularly when they're ways that we have not evolved to think, that are counterintuitive to us, then we need to be explicit about teaching the value of those things.
Yeah.
And I think that whatever ideas of fairness and justice we might have will be better served by having a better, clearer-eyed understanding about the nature of the world. That whatever your agenda about how things go forward would be, you're better off knowing more than knowing less. And I think that science is our most powerful way of knowing more. So I advocate for it, and I advocate for everybody to have a better idea about what this is, and therefore for society and politicians to see what the value is of us continuing to do this. So when we don't do it, when we do crazy stuff, when we accept ideas like the identity of somebody putting forward an idea is more important than what the idea is itself, I think society as a whole tends not to believe that, and I think we risk losing our social license by doing that.
The irony is it's such a ridiculous claim that even without a high academic education, it's so obviously untrue.
Well, yeah, except that, remember, societies have done this. We've always had our shamans and our priests and things like that, who are people, who claim special sacred knowledge that other people don't have. So because of these ideas about agency and invisible agency that I was talking about before, I think that we've historically accepted those claims in a way that science says, no, don't. Let's. So science has this in common with, it is in a sense democratic in that it says knowledge is available to everybody. It doesn't matter who you are.
Anyone can do it.
Anyone can do it.
Rutherford is a great example. Yeah. I mean, he was a farm boy from Southland or something like that.
Yeah, but I don't just mean what your origins were. It should be possible to.
No, I'm just saying that's in a sense quite an extreme case. Yeah, going from zero to hero.
Right, but that your identity shouldn't define.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, it doesn't give you any special claims to
he
truth.
Could have been Māori.
Could have been Māori. Yeah.
So to finish off with, Doug, there's a new course, a compulsory course that the University of Auckland has instantiated. What's it called, and what's it about, and what are your thoughts on it?
It's called Waipapa Taumata Rao, or it's fairly close, I think. And it does two things. It does several things. One of the ideas is that there's a notion that there should be something distinctive about studying at the University of Auckland, as opposed to other ones, and we need to point out the distinctiveness of place about where we are. And so I don't agree with that entirely. I think that there are many ways that we could, demonstrate that we're distinctive. But I also think that if we were being seen as something that's a bit like Oxford University but not quite as good, I wouldn't be all that upset with that characterisation of us. I'd say that's great. Because I am more interested in, the global, the international, than I'm interested in the local. There we go. So there's that. It takes a strong kind of knowledge systems approach, and we've talked earlier in this about whether these things are actually sensibly characterised as different knowledge systems, because then you have to think about what qualifies as knowledge. So I think that if we were to talk about different explanatory systems, then I think that might be a sort of a reasonable way to do that. But I think that science is largely kind of caricatured in it, and that there is a desire to show all of the stuff that's wrong about science, and science is terrible, and that these.
So it's in a sense, it's articulating what your In Defence of Letter was about. That science is a colonial process to subjugate indigenous people.
Yeah, and that science is narrow, and that it's a bad thing that science is non-spiritual. That worldviews that include spirituality are somehow superior, and science doesn't have that, so therefore it's inferior. And I don't agree with that. I think. I've argued before about why I think supernatural, spiritual explanations are so common, but also I think that we need to be explicit about science offering a liberating alternative to those. And we should talk about the good things about it as well as the bad things about it. And I'm afraid that I think it takes particular views on matters that are politically contested at the moment, like how should we interpret the Treaty of Waitangi and what that means, and those views are in my particular view, those are quite radical accounts that are being given. But it wouldn't matter if they were promulgating my account either. I'd say we are really not.
Well, you're saying it would actually be. It would matter. It would matter in a negative sense.
Yeah. No, it would.
It would be wrong to promulgate what you believe. It would be compulsorily to first years.
It would be an equally bad thing to do to tell all the students that politically they should think what I think, that they should think what Era Kapakini thinks or something like that. So I just don't think that we should be doing that.
What, if I can make, why is that wrong to do that?
Because I think that that when matters are politically contested, then taking a particular view violates the principle of institutional neutrality, and I think that institutional neutrality is a necessary precondition for academic freedom. So the Calvin rules from the University of Chicago put it like this, well, go back slightly. So academics within universities have, under the law, what's called a critic and conscience of society duty. But the university itself does not have that duty. So the way that the Calvin rules put it is that the university is the home and the sponsor of critics. It is not itself the critic.
So this course is actually being the critic in a sense.
Well,
and is it actually teaching dogma?
Well,
rather than knowledge.
Well, dogma is often something, when we don't agree with something, we'll say that that's dogma.
No. Dogma is uncontestable.
Yeah.
So I can, as we talked about, I can contest your theories and experimentation that you've concluded X, Y, and Z. I can contest that, and you would welcome that, right?
Yeah.
But if I write the in inverted commas wrong thing on my test, and I'm marked against that, and I fail the test, and then I can't get into medical school. Right.
So I don't know that happens, but I think it's likely that it happens.
I've heard firsthand that you cannot write the wrong thing.
Yeah, and so to some extent, I would say, suppose a student in a maths exam was to write that that integration gives you the slope of a line and differentiation gives you the area under it. That's wrong and backwards, and they've got it the wrong way around. So that you should be marked down for saying things that are untrue. But when I think that we're talking about things that are politically contestable, then I think that that's a problem. And I think that universities are supposed to be places where there's a whole variety of ideas, where we, to get closer to what the truth would be in the end, what we have to do is to let a whole lot of different ideas flourish and try those out. And if we take an institutional position on this is what we consider to be politically true, we suppress that open discussion. So I think that's a problem. Whether we are trying to indoctrinate our students by doing this, I think is an open question, but I certainly think that we're doing something that gives the impression that that's what we're trying to do. Whether it will succeed or not, I mean, I have this kind of hope in the natural rebelliousness of young people that they tend to like to think the opposite of whatever the elders and betters have told them, and so who knows? This may well backfire. But I worry about that too, because I'm concerned about the sort of increasing polarisation in New Zealand society, and we're not willing to talk across divides, and that's partly because of this powerful identification of ideas with people, that attacking the idea is seen as attacking the person. I think that that's just wrong. I think that arguing with an idea is respecting the person that you're arguing with about it. You're saying you are worthy of my engagement, rather than just saying, you're an idiot and I'm just going to forget about anything you have to say.
Yeah, well, that is a very nice way to finish. So thank you very much. It's been a great discussion.
Thank you, Michael. Enjoyed being on the show.
To help the Shape of Dialogue grow, please subscribe, like and comment and share it to all and sundry. Many thanks.